I'm Dr. Meredith Warner of Warner Orthopedics and Wellness, and also founder of the Well Theory and the Healing Soul. This is my clinic in Baton Rouge, which is where I'm primarily based. But I also teach orthopedics in New Orleans to the LSU Orthopedic Department, the residents. But my real love is natural medicine and general health and wellness, which I sort of fell into as I noted all of our orthopedic conditions seem to have a primary foundation and a primary start point. And turns out that is chronic inflammation and oxidative stress, which are byproducts of our toxic lives, living by chemical plants, as I do, pollution, things like that, diet, food industry, and then metabolism. So let's just briefly talk about metabolism. And I don't go that much into that. I'm just sort of giving you a background into what is metabolism. And a lot of people think you can biohack your metabolism. I'm going to talk about that very briefly and just sort of give you some tools to potentially make your body work better. Okay, so what is the problem, or one of the problems? 95% of diets in America, worldwide really, but really in America, we've sort of made an art form out of the diet industry, if you will. 95% of them fail. 90% of Americans, some say 93% now, have metabolic dysfunction or so-called metabolic syndrome X, or at least that's the term that is used in the ICD-10 coding system that we doctors have to use to name diseases. So if there's no ICD-10 for it, it doesn't exist in the mind of the insurance companies. Metabolic syndrome X is metabolic dysfunction. About 50% of us are insulin resistant already, whether you know it or not. How would you know it? You're probably never going to know it because your doctor's never going to order a fasting insulin level unless you ask for it. So I would advise that you do that. Meanwhile, snack food sales are increasing, not dropping, despite all of our growing knowledge about the dangers of the food industry and highly processed foods. In fact, PepsiCo's revenues last quarter were $22.3 billion. They made in 1/4 of a year. Okay, and they expect 10% growth quarter over quarter going forward. So you're not going to escape from ultra processed foods. They're still going to be purchased. They're still going to be eaten. We are American. That is all we have available, more or less. So what can we do to make life a little bit better for us, to make our bodies work better? So just real quick, let's review what is metabolic syndrome. It's basically a conglomerate of symptoms where you have glucose intolerance, or you don't have the ability to respond to glucose in your bloodstream properly. Central obesity or truncal obesity, where you're sort of fat in the middle and not on the bottom or the top. And then, of course, insulin resistance. There are certain criteria. If you have 3 of the following 5 criteria, which are on the right side of the screen, then you technically have metabolic syndrome. So if you're a man and your waist circumference is more than 40 inches, measured at the belly button, or more than 35 inches if you're a female, that's one criteria. If your blood pressure is more than 130/85, that's another criteria. And I'm pretty sure they're talking about without medication. If your fasting triglyceride levels are more than 150, and the unit is milligrams per deciliter, or if your fasting HDL or high density lipoprotein levels are less than 40 in men and less than 50 in women, and if your fasting glucose is more than 100. If you have any 3 of these criteria, and these are basic things that should be checked when you go get your yearly physical or whatever, and you can obviously measure your own waist circumference, but if you have more than 3 of these, then you have metabolic syndrome, and you're part of that 90 to 93% of Americans. So don't feel like you're alone. It's pretty much everyone. Okay, and now let's briefly review what is metabolism. So basically, metabolism is pretty simple. It's the chemical reactions that convert food into usable energy that is used by your cells. So think of it this way. I think of it like a car often. If you extracted crude oil from the ground, you would not be able to run a vehicle on that. So that crude storage form of energy has to be refined or converted into a usable form, aka gasoline, that you can use for your car. Same thing's going on in your body. You're converting one form of carbon-based energy to another form, okay? All of nature is simply mass and energy. The law of conservation of mass applies here, as does the law of conservation of energy. These are basic, fundamental principles about the universe in physics, okay? Energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It can just simply be changed. And then using energy doesn't make it just disappear, right? It doesn't just go away, it gets converted into something else. And fat likewise doesn't disappear. Fat actually becomes the breath that you breathe out. So the carbon you eat becomes whatever in the body, then you use it and it doesn't disappear. It gets converted into the waste product of urine and CO2 that you breathe out, which then is used by plants. And we're going to get into that. So this is a beautiful, huge system of metabolism where everything links together in a very perfect way. So you and I need to understand that we are part of a much bigger system that is so big and complicated, it's almost incomprehensible. So just think about this. In a single minute, so 60 seconds, the Earth travels at 1,775 kilometers per minute. Okay, so in that 1 minute, you're traveling almost 2,000 kilometers around the sun. The light from the sun has traveled in that minute about 18 million kilometers, so the speed of light. The heart has pumped about 75 times and has sent blood through about 96,000 kilometers of blood vessels. And in that, we're 35,000 RBC, I'm sorry, 3,500, 35,000 RBCs, sorry, red blood cells, 50 billion white blood cells, 1,500 billion platelets, which are the little cellular or acellular structures that hold all of the clotting factors and healing factors. So like when we do platelet-rich plasma in orthopedics, we're taking the platelets and concentrating them and putting them into different structures to harness that power. And then 100 million oxygen molecules. So just thinking about those numbers alone in a single minute, it's sort of mind-boggling. And this diagram on the right is a metabolism diagram that is from ancient times. It's in the public domain, sort of showing the complexity of all of the reactions and interlinks that happen all the time in your body. So metabolism, if you just wanted the conversion of food to go to ATP to happen on its own, it would take like 100 billion years. What makes it happen in an efficient manner and lets us get around and go about our business are enzymes. These are proteins that speed reactions up. So the blue thing in this diagram is the enzyme. So it takes a molecule, does whatever enzymes do and spits it out, and there's your finished product. And the enzyme just makes it way faster. Okay, so we would be incredibly slow in terms of metabolism without enzymes. And they are the largest fraction of your entire proteome, or all of the proteins in your body. The vast majority are enzymes. And there are 37 trillion human cells, and each of them has 1 billion reactions per second, chemical reactions that require enzymes. So that means every second, you have 37 billion trillion reactions going on in your body. So it's just mind-boggling, like incomprehensible, sort of like the US debt. Like it's just so big, you can't even imagine it. And then on top of that, you've got 100 trillion bacterial cells hanging out. You're actually more made of bacteria than you are of human cells. And if that doesn't freak you out, nothing will. We're basically a bag to carry around bacteria. And metabolism is interdependent on all of these cells working together in a coordinated fashion. So it comes from the Greek word, as much of our language does, and I don't know which syllable to be accented here, perhaps someone could tell me, but metabole or metabole, that is the derivative word, which means to change. So we change one type of matter into another as we create usable energy. And remember, we evolved in a system that has oxygen, hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, and then the ultimate or the original source of energy are the photons that come from the sun. So the photonic energy from the sun, okay, so that's waves of light, which are energy, matter, mass. The physics is way too much for me. But the photonic energy from the sun comes and it hits plants that convert that into carbon products that store energy. So think of a peach, think of a carrot. These are just the carbon byproducts that the plant takes, the photons, and combines it with nitrogen, carbon, carbon dioxide, and creates a stored form of carbon that, guess what happens to next? We use to form ATP to power ourselves. Then we breathe out CO2. The plants take that in and the cycle goes on. Okay, so we form the ATP simply by moving electrons around. So ultimately, the true source of the energy, which makes sense if you know anything about electricity, are the electrons. Okay, so somehow the sun's energy is converted to electrons in the plant, and that's with chlorophyll, of course. And then we take the electrons and make it into ATP. And that requires cofactors that shuttle the electrons from the glycolysis or the Krebs cycle chain, where glucose is initially broken down, and NAD plus, which is the unreduced form, and FAD, then take electrons. They become reduced, which just means they become more negative, and electrons are negative. So when you gain an electron, you become more negative, right? And then they shuttle them to the electron transport chain. And that's how it all works. And that's why NAD plus is so important, which is one of the reasons I take NMN every day. So a precursor molecule for this primary need for an electron shuttle, and NAD depletes naturally as we age. Whether it did prehistorically, we'll never know. But in our current environment, we know it does. So I supplement with that to try to help this whole thing along. So that's one little trick that could potentially help your metabolism. So catabolism and anabolism are part of metabolism. Catabolism is the breaking down of matter into particles and usable energy. So remember, you're just changing things. You're not creating energy, you're not creating mass. So you're changing one form of matter and mass to another and liberating some energy from it, but then you need to store that energy somewhere, right? Something needs to happen to it. So we form what's called adenosine triphosphate. That is our gasoline. Okay, so ATP, that is the primary usable storage form of energy by the cells. It is a very highly charged molecule and it has 4 negative charges. Okay, remember I told you electrons are negative and electrons are the primary source of energy for your metabolism. Your ratio of NAD plus, which is the oxidized form of nicotinamide adenine diphosphate, if I'm remembering that correctly, to NADH, which is the reduced form, which again is more negative, so it's carrying more electrons, right? That ratio in your cell will determine your personal capacity for energy production. And the hydrogens, so every time you add an electron or a negative charge to something, the body balances with a hydrogen molecule, which is a positive charge, to give a net charge of 0. The hydrogens are used to run the proton pump that actually produces ATP. Now, that means it's used for electron transport chain. I did a whole nother talk on oxidative phosphorylation, which you can review if you're interested in this. Personally, I think it's super fascinating and just like mind-boggling beautiful how all of this works together. So if you want, go watch that. But for your purposes, all you need to know is catabolism is a breakdown, the creation of energy in a different form of mass, and then anabolism is the opposite. So that's why you've heard the term anabolic steroids. So like when all the bodybuilders would take that, that's because they were taking steroids that forced the building or the creating of proteins or muscle protein. That is anabolism, when you build something up. So in this case, you would take the electrons in some particle, combine them and create a new particle that is bigger, that is storing energy in a different form. So we do this all the time. We're building DNA, we're building proteins, we're making enzymes, et cetera, et cetera. This is going on all the time in your body. Remember, 37 billion trillion chemical reactions a second. Question. Somebody just asked, how does NMN, which is a supplement I take and that we offer through the Well Theory, increase NAD+. So there's a one-step chemical reaction once it's taken up by your cells and it's converted to NAD directly. Some people have been known to get IV infusions of NAD, but it takes hours and it's very, very expensive. So NMN is a much more effective and efficient way to daily give yourself to improve this ratio of NAD to NADH. How long does what take? Oh, how long should you be taking NMN? The jury's out on that, right? I take it for longevity, health, and wellness. So I will better be able to answer that question, hopefully when I'm 120 years old. But essentially, it's instantaneous. I mean, you take it and in a few hours, you've got more NAD. How that affects longevity for humans, nobody has a great clinical trial because how could you? But in most other life form, it's been shown to improve longevity. All right. So your metabolism consists of a basal metabolic rate. Okay, so that is the rate of energy. If you're just sitting quietly in a room doing literally nothing, not even thinking, this is what you would, how many calories you would burn. And there's very fancy ways to figure this out. Basically, we know, or we think we know, right? Because science is always changing. The brain uses about 20% of your basal metabolic rate. So let's say you burn 1,000 calories a day. Your brain would use 20% of that, or 200, right? Your liver and spleen together use 27%. Your muscle uses about 18%. And obviously, the more muscle, the more that's going to use, the less muscle, the less that's going to use, so on and so forth. So a lot of your basic daily needs are just for maintenance and running the system. So I'm not even talking about moving, picking objects up, running, thinking hard. That's going to take extra energy. About 75% then of your daily kilocalories go to the brain, the liver, and the spleen. Obviously, your body considers these to be fairly important organs, right? And then about 25% is used to maintain the electrical potentials. What is an electrical potential? That is in the mitochondria between the cell membrane, so outside and inside. Your body maintains an amount of protons out here and not protons down here. So this makes this positive charged up here, negative here. This is your membrane potential. So potential is the difference, the change, what change is possible. When the protons drop through a certain molecule called ATPase, that's when you form your energy. And you have to have that difference or they never drop through, right? The body loves a balance. So you force this difference and then the body creates a balance the minute it's allowed to, and you harness that. And that's also part of the electron transport chain. So what is a calorie? This is a picture of a calorimeter, which is a fancy device with some water, and you basically blow something up in it and measure how much the water changes temperature, and then you know how many calories are embedded within whatever that object was. This is how they figure out the calories of basically everything. A kilocalorie is 1,000 calories. So when you think of calories, you're actually thinking of kilocalories because that's how most things are labeled. So like a bagel, which normally has about 350 calories, is really 350,000 calories. It's 350 kilocalories. Each calorie is 4.184 joules. Joules are sort of a different way to measure energy, and it has to do with a Newton. And that's used in physics and engineering. But for nutrition and metabolism, everybody has converted joules to kilocalories and calories, okay? A calorie is the thermal energy that is required to raise 1 millimeter of water 1 degree Celsius. And calorimetry is the science of determining that. So whatever you want to determine the energy of, you would do calorimetry and see how much energy is in that object by seeing how it raises the temperature of water. That's basically it. That's where calorie comes from. We have a specific question. Hope I can answer it.
Thyroid was removed 37 years ago, so my metabolism is thyroid hormones. Could NMN either replace or impact my former raw thyroid hormone?
Okay. This is somebody who had their thyroid removed for whatever reason years ago, who's on replacement therapy. And the question is, could NMN change how the thyroid works? In that, NMN would change the metabolic potential of every cell in your body. Thyroid hormone, there are receptors for thyroid hormone almost everywhere in the body. So assuming your Armour thyroid is replenishing you to normal, NMN would act like it would act in anybody else that has a thyroid. However, it would make the cells more efficient, so they would potentially respond to the thyroid replacement better. But really what's most important is that you're getting enough of the thyroid replacement to keep your tissue T3 levels at a decent, reasonable amount where you can function normally. So again, remember I told you that the planet Earth and all of us kind of grew up together, if you will, oxygen and carbon. Energy is held in carbon bonds. So that's where most of the energy in food is in the bonds between the food molecules. Primarily carbon is what we really use, right? Oxygen, turns out, is the final electron acceptor of the electron transport chain. So think about what it's called, the electron transport chain. So it's a chain reaction where electrons are just moved down the chain. They have to go somewhere. Remember, energy is neither created nor destroyed. The electrons end up binding to an oxygen molecule. Hydrogen comes in to balance it out, negative, positive, and what do you end up with? Water, which ultimately is urine. And before the electron transport chain, you would combine oxygen with carbon and breathe out carbon dioxide. Those are our waste products. So basically, we breathe out and pee out our waste products, which then the plants use, right? And then the sun is still the original source of photonic energy. The photons hit the chlorophyll molecule, excites it, and then the electrons from that excitation are captured and then put into a carbon-based fuel source like a carrot or a peach. And that's how it all works. So solar cells, similar principle, right? Not to go off on a tangent, but just to kind of bring it home. Plants convert photons from the sun into stored energy. Fossil fuels are an example. So oil is just ancient dead matter, breakdown products of animals and plants from billions of years ago, and all that energy is just stored in the carbon bonds of those things. Plants capture the entire plants capture the visible spectrum. So kind of what you and I see, that is all of the energy they're getting from the sun, and they capture carbon dioxide at very low levels. So they're very efficient at pulling carbon out of the air. Solar panels actually capture the entire light spectrum, so in theory that would be better, but they convert it directly into flowing electrons, and it's a use it or lose it principle. If you don't use those electrons right away, they become heat or dissipate into some other unusable form of energy. So they have to be used immediately or put into batteries. Right now, the United States Department of Energy actually has a center called the Joint Center for Artificial Photosynthesis, where they're trying to manufacture this. So in your metabolism, your body, every single cell this is going on that has a mitochondria, right? You take stored energy made by the plants and you convert it into ATP and you use it. And that's through the oxidative phosphorylation chain. This is the electron transport chain on the right with the cytochromes, where the electrons move up and down into these different little compartments until you create the proton gradient. Then they drop through ATPase and you create ATP. Coenzyme Q, FYI, is very important for this electron transport chain and is another shuttle for the electrons. So NMN and coenzyme Q make your mitochondria work better.
Mary Jo O'Neill says good morning.
Good morning, Mary Jo. Okay, so here's our problem in America. What do we do when we have too much energy? Okay. Remember, fat, or maybe you don't know, but fat is about just over double the amount per gram of a carbohydrate. Carbs are 4 kilocalories per gram. Fat is 9 kilocalories per gram. Our system that evolved with these plants and the sun and the oxygen and the water did not anticipate a time frame whereby food would be massively plentiful, completely fake, and in bizarre combinations. So think about this. Nowhere in nature does fat and sugar exist together. Humans have to put that together, okay? Which we do marvelously well, unfortunately. And because we did not evolve for this system of fake foods and excessive numbers of fake foods, we now have metabolic dysfunction. We are creating the byproducts of the mitochondria going on and on and on and on, producing. One of the byproducts are reactive oxygen species or free radicals. That gives you oxidative stress, and we talked about that in another talk too, so I'm not going to belabor the point. And then, of course, we have chronic inflammation. I personally believe oxidative stress, chronic inflammation, metabolic dysfunction, to include insulin resistance, are the primary source of almost every single orthopedic problem, barring a fracture. Right? Like all of your wear and tear or deterioration problems are really from this fundamental issue. It's a metabolic problem that I think we can address with a few simple tricks and a few simple rules about your life. But one of the primary issues in our system is there's just too much of everything. And we don't have a system that knows what to do with too much of everything. And that's just a picture of a triglyceride. All a triglyceride is, triglyceride, 3 glyceride, 3 fatty acids on a glycerol backbone. So just real quick, this is just showing you briefly how fatty acids and triglycerides are made. All I want you to get from this slide is that fructose will convert to fat much more quickly than excessive glucose. So what does that mean? Anything with high fructose corn syrup or free fructose that's not attached to a fiber, such as juice, will convert to fat very, very quickly, and in particular will pad your liver with fat, your hepatocytes, and your muscle, and lead you to metabolic dysfunction faster than other things. So try to avoid excess fructose. That's probably one of the best things you can do. Don't drink juice. Only get your juice through food that you like, fruit, where you get the fiber and all of the other micronutrients. And then definitely avoid high fructose corn syrup, brown sugar syrup, whatever, all the different names they've come up with to hide the high fructose corn syrup. And then just know that your fat cells themselves, if they're surrounded by too much glucose in the bloodstream, are going to make more fat. So they are equipped to do that and will do that if you keep giving them excessive amounts of energy. They have to do something with it because mass is neither created nor destroyed. So how can you optimize your personal metabolism? Well, you just first use your existing metabolism appropriately. We're not doing this correctly right now. Number one, hydrate. You have to have the water molecules, right, for anything to run. I already told you kind of how and why you need that positively charged H to get the proton pump for your membrane potentials, et cetera, and so on. Second thing is to move. None of us move enough. Any movement is better than no movement. Fidgeting extends life 20 to 30%, okay? Sitting around and doing nothing is the worst thing in the world you can do. So at least move somehow every day. Lift some heavy objects periodically. And of course, being in the crazy world we are today, I'm going to have to say, please consult your physician or personal trainer on how to lift weights, et cetera, and so on. But the fundamental principle I'm trying to tell you is you got to build muscle. Muscle burns 19% of your basal metabolic rate. Muscle's the biggest glucose sink. And muscle has a lot of hormonal activities that actually help your brain and improve your longevity. And then sleep. Believe it or not, good sleep will make you thinner. I know that doesn't make any sense, but sleep is when you burn mostly fat. Even though you're burning fewer calories per hour, you're burning mostly fat, assuming you're sleeping in a fasted state. And nothing in your body works well unless it's allowed to be fixed or maintained. You fix your car, you change your tires, you put air on them, you change your air filters, same in your house. Nobody's letting this happen to their body because nobody's given the sleep time. You have to allow your body to sleep or your metabolism falls apart. Poor sleep is highly correlated with obesity. In fact, probably causal, a lot of people are thinking now. So just use what you have that's in you now better. Hydrate, move, lift, sleep. Okay. The most important thing is get your insulin right. Now, this is going to be really hard to do because 90% of us are metabolically dysfunctional and 50% of us are insulin resistant. Insulin promotes fat formation. Insulin is anabolic. It builds things. Insulin receptors are on fat cells, and GLUT4 receptors, which pull glucose out of the bloodstream, are activated when insulin hits. It inhibits the breakdown of lipids, okay, and promotes protein synthesis, but also promotes the formation of fat or triglycerides. Insulin is critical for bringing glucose out of the bloodstream into the cells for conversion to ATP later. So sometimes you don't use it right away. You could store it as what's called glycogen, and that is probably one of the best analogies I've heard is from Dr. Andy Galpin, who's an exercise physiologist. So think of it, if you're out in the woods and you've got little twigs, you light a match. The match is your primary form of energy. The twigs are your secondary, quicker form of energy. Bigger twigs are the next form of energy, so on and so forth. So glycogen is in that twig group. It's not your first form of energy, that's creatine, but then you're going to burn the glycogen that's stored in your muscle and your liver cells right away. And then the long-term fat storage is fat. Okay, white fat or brown fat, mostly white fat. But if you are insulin resistant, if you have too much glucose and your pancreas is pumping out too much insulin in response to it all the time, your body becomes resistant to it, just like it does anything else. If you take too many narcotics, your body becomes resistant to it. If you drink too much alcohol, your body becomes resistant to it. You have a whole kind of problem. If you exercise a ton, your body becomes adapted to it and you're used to it, and then it's not really hard anymore, so on and so forth. So the body adapts and is flexible and will change for the good or for the bad, depending on what you do to it. If you give your body too much insulin, it's going to adapt and become insulin resistant. Insulin resistance is the primary cause of anybody's slow metabolism. Okay, so you have to get your sugar right to optimize your metabolism, which means you have to figure out if you're insulin resistant. So you probably need a fasting glucose, you probably need a fasting insulin level, and you need to check your HbA1c, which shows you the average glucose level over the past 3 months in your bloodstream. If your glucose turns out to be pretty high and you're insulin resistant because your fasting insulin levels are also high, then you need to seriously think about changing the way you eat to reduce the amount of sugar you take in. Excess sugar is the number one problem of almost everything. Or fructose, I should say. Sugar and fructose. So when you're insulin resistant, there are more free fatty acids in your bloodstream. What does that mean? There's more triglycerides, higher levels of your lipid profile looks terrible when you go to the doctor. You have accelerated lipolysis, but reduced storage in white fat, which is the adipose you think of when you think of seeing somebody that's obese. So that means you end up storing more where? Around the organs, which gives you what? Truncal obesity. That's why that is one of the hallmarks of metabolic syndrome. If you are too big around the middle, that means you're packing too much fat around all of your organs and inside of your organs, which means they're massively dysfunctional. And then the free fatty acids that come from the insulin-resistant adipocytes themselves are dysfunctional. All of this is just this big cycle where you get more fat in the bloodstream, more fat stored around the organs, the mitochondria don't get the fuel they need to burn the fat, so on and so forth, and you just have this big toilet bowl effect where you just get flushed down the drain. So the first thing you should do is control your insulin levels so your body can reset and become less insulin resistant, which means you can't keep giving it extra fructose and glucose. Okay, so that was insulin resistance. Remember I told you sleep was important. Well, along with sleep is what's called circadian optimization or circadian rhythm. This is very important, and I can't emphasize it enough, even though there's really only one slide on this. Most cells in your body function on a schedule, or are meant to function on a schedule. Again, remember, we evolved in a system where there's dark light, dark light, dark light. Photonic energy, no photonic energy, photonic energy, no photonic energy, so on and so forth. Every cell or most cells in your body have a schedule of high activity, maintenance, high activity, maintenance, high activity, repair. If you don't give it that time to repair and restore, you are messing everything up. So the best thing, the easiest thing to do first is get yourself on a set schedule every day, don't deviate. An early to rise bedtime, awakening time, early to bed. And once you establish that, you will start sleeping better. And guess what? While you're asleep, you can't eat. So you're going to be fasting longer, which is better for you. Probably the best thing to do is match your feeding schedule to your wake sleep schedule, which is called time restricted eating, which is massively beneficial for human health and for getting the most efficient and best, I guess, activity out of your metabolism. When you mess with your normal circadian cycle, you destroy everything. Shift work has been called a known carcinogen by the World Health Organization. We know people that have shift work or have poor sleeping schedules have more obesity, more chronic disease, more diabetes, more orthopedic conditions. So the easiest first step for you to make your metabolism work better is get yourself on a normal schedule. Don't care about what anybody else thinks about it and just stick to it. Once you do that, then you could add time restricted eating. Then you can start worrying about how much glucose and fructose you're adding, et cetera, and so on. Everything is a baby step. It will build on itself. You will feel better and your metabolism will get better. So don't forget the circadian rhythm. What's a good, is that a question? Oh, somebody asked a question. What's a good example of a circadian rhythm? Well, circadian rhythm just means around the sun. So the circadian rhythm for me is I wake up every day no matter what, somewhere between 5 and 6 a.m. And I try to go to bed no matter what, somewhere between 8:30 and 10, period. And then I time restrict eat in that schedule. But, you know, my work schedule has to take priority, obviously. But basically, if you're up with the sun and asleep with dusk, so you follow the sun, that is a circadian rhythm.
Would be available. It'll be available on Facebook and all of the websites.
Alice asked if this live stream would be available later. Of course, yes. This will be on Facebook and also all of my websites. So thewelltheory.com, thehealingsoul.com, and WarnerOrthopedicsandWellness.com. More questions, hold on.
Pre-diabetic, having CGM to know what my glucose level is. But I've noticed that when I do an extreme exercise, moving boxes into storage, my glucose level increases. I automatically get tired and really have to sit down. What should I do? Beware of.
Okay, that was a long question. Let me see if I got it. This is somebody who's pre-diabetic, so not full-blown diabetes yet. So they still have some, I can't read it. Oh, this is somebody who still has some ability of their insulin to function, but not normal. Although what is normal if 90% of us are metabolically dysfunctional? Anyway, this person's saying when they exercise, based on their continuous glucose monitor, they're saying their glucose level goes up with exercise.
Yeah.
Does it go down shortly after? Normally, exercise pulls glucose out of the bloodstream. But if it's going up with your initial bout of exercise, I would have to imagine that's because of the stress response to cortisol. So your body's releasing cortisol, which is the stress hormone, which is also what is released in the morning when we are faced with sunlight. And that promotes the release of glucose. So as you would imagine, with the fight or flight response, if you release cortisol, you're going to want glucose in your bloodstream because you're going to want quick uptake in all the muscle cells and whatever needs it to escape the wild animal or whatever. So probably what's happening is it's spiking with your initial bout of exercise, but over time, that should make your glucose more normal. Exercise should, I would think.
What should I do and be aware of to improve my health?
I would just keep track of it some more and see if the glucose spikes early and then normalizes. If you're finding that your monitor is telling you that your glucose is staying up after exercise, either it may be dysfunctional or maybe the exercise isn't as strenuous as you think it is. But even walking 20 minutes after dinner has been shown in multiple studies to drop glucose in the bloodstream. So the best thing you can do is keep exercising. I mean, that is the number one determinant of longevity and good health is exercise, bar none. Nobody's ever disproven that. So I would go talk to your endocrinologist and make sure that the thing's functioning properly. And like, when is it measuring you? Like when are you looking at it with exercise? Because normally it would spike with cortisol, but it should normalize after that. So you should keep exercising. Maybe you need to change the type of exercise you're doing, harness more muscle power. Berberine helps too. Berberine pulls glucose out of the bloodstream and is great for pre-diabetics, I think. Of course, there's no longitudinal, randomized, placebo-controlled studies, of course. But all of the data on berberine shows that it works more or less like metformin and pulls glucose out of the bloodstream without all of the nausea side effects of metformin. So you could talk to your endocrinologist about that as well. But that's a good natural way to try to keep your glucose normalized. The other thing is some people try to match their exercise with their circadian rhythm. So some people will try to exercise in the morning when you're supposed to have a cortisol spike versus trying to exercise in the evening when your cortisol is supposed to be going down. So maybe play with the time of day that you're exercising.
Mary Jo said her sugar went down when she started taking berberine. She's down another pound.
Mary Jo, who is also watching the show, said that berberine did help her blood glucose drop and she's lost weight. So like I said, managing your insulin resistance is, aside from good sleep and a circadian rhythm, the easiest thing you can do to biohack, if you will, or optimize your metabolism. One more question. Okay, thank you. I mean, you're welcome. Denise, you're welcome. Dennis or Denise? Okay, can we go to the next slide?
Deborah has a question.
Oh, we have another question. Deborah.
My circadian rhythm became off when I retired. No longer got up at 4 and bed around 9. How do I reset it?
So this is somebody who retired and noticed that their circadian rhythm or their daily schedule changed. So they used to get up at 4 and go to bed at 9. The question is, how do I reset it? So the easiest way to reset it is to start on the wake side. So just make yourself get up whatever time you want to get up, and the earlier, not pre-dawn, but like 5, 6 is probably reasonable. Just make yourself wake up at that time, and then you're going to naturally start to go to bed earlier and earlier and earlier. There's all kind of tricks to get a set bedtime, from sleep restriction to good sleeping hygiene, et cetera, et cetera. But the easiest way to reset a circadian rhythm is to just make sure you wake up early at the time you want to wake up. And then, over the day, adenosine builds up in your brain, which creates sleep pressure, and you will fall asleep. I will say, don't give yourself any stimulants after lunchtime. No coffee, nothing with caffeine or anything that would hype you up, because that changes the adenosine sleep pressure in your brain. Addison's, yeah, that's adrenal issue.
I would just know someone with Addison's.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means. The burn, or I don't know what they're talking about.
Addison's is like a adrenocorticotropic. It's like a cortisol issue. That's a great question. So if your cortisol levels are sort of messed up to begin with, probably, and there's really no continuous cortisol monitor, right? There's no real way to check this. You could do a 24-hour saliva test, highly inconvenient, obviously. You maybe could get an AM and PM cortisol and then start playing with your circadian rhythm. You're going to really have to control your melatonin at night, so you can't have any bright lights on. You can't have blue light. You need to have a completely dark room, et cetera, to try to control your cortisol output, if you will. But if you can't even do that, that's a great question. You probably need to work with your endocrinologist very closely to try to get set on this. But I would say harness nature to the best of your ability, because the body really responds phenomenally well to sunlight and darkness. Okay, so back to what we're talking about. How do you optimize your metabolism? Where I sort of already told you, circadian rhythm, good sleep, and control your insulin levels. Just know that you, as a human being, have a basic set point of metabolism, okay? It doesn't really change. Nobody can really biohack their metabolism, if you will. You can't really make it faster or slower. You can make it better, which means a little bit faster, but there's not going to be major drama here. So think about this. There's been a lot of research done looking at metabolism, and when a group of researchers compared the number of calories burned by the hunter-gatherer tribes in Africa, who, run walks 6, 7, 8, 10 miles a day every day, and have to go find their food and forage for it. They can't just pick up the phone and get a pizza delivered. They turn out to burn the same number of calories per day as a sedentary office worker in Illinois. And that's the example they use in the study. So over time, your body adapts to whatever situation it's in, and it's going to get that metabolic set point where it wants it. And we're going to talk about why, but you're going to reduce some activities of your basal metabolic rate to equate to whatever activity level you're at and end up burning the same number of calories. So for instance, women training for a marathon who were previously sedentary, their metabolic rate went up in the first week or two of training and then immediately reverted back, even though they were running more miles. So just know that, but know that you can get better anyway. You just have to control your sleep and the number of insulin molecules floating around in your body. You can't be insulin resistant. Humans are the only creature that I know of, or maybe you guys know of another one, that overeat and become obese, with the exception of our pets, which we also make obese. And this is a very recent phenomenon. Humans were not obese until like 100 years ago or so, by and large. So this is something we've done to ourselves somehow, and that we should be able to revert back to being non-obese and having really highly functioning, good, healthy systems. So these guys, Ponsor, and Speakman, used a double-labeled water isotope tracking system. Remember I told you water is your waste product, so it's sort of a indirect way to figure out what your metabolic rate is over time. They found that the greatest predictor of the rate of your metabolism is fat-free mass. What does that mean? The more muscle you have, the better. So like I said, lift. So one of the problems with aging is what's called sarcopenia, where you lose muscle mass. Your metabolism does slow down, and you get weaker and frail. One of the best things you can do to improve your health, to improve your metabolism, to live longer and have fewer problems when you get older is get strong. Now, I'm not saying go out and try to do deadlifts and all that right now. Don't go watch the strongman contest on ESPN3 and then go try to flip tires. Go talk to somebody who knows what they're doing, like a physical therapist or personal trainer. But it is hugely important for you to build muscle. Okay, so that's the greatest predictor of metabolic rate. Larger bodies burn more calories. Metabolism, this graph is beautiful. It shows you on the left side of the screen with the pink, that's the metabolic rate when you're like a baby, 1 to 2 years old. Super, super fast. Why? Because we're just taking energy and converting it into stuff and growing. Then it's very stable from about 20 to 60. So all of that talk you hear people say, oh, I'm 30 or 40, my metabolism slowed, or oh, menopause and my metabolism slowed. It's not true. This study definitively proved that we have a very stable metabolism from about 20 to 60 years old. 60, it does seem to slow down a bit. Now, is that because there's a natural decrease in the levels of NAD? Is that because most elderly people are frail and have no muscle? We don't know. They're working all that out. All I know is I'm trying to stay strong. I'm trying to keep my NAD levels up. I work on my circadian rhythm a lot, et cetera, because I want to stay in that blue line. I don't want to get in that green and drop off. So just know that you are probably somewhere in that blue line. And if you're just past 60 and you're starting to drop off, you can lift weights, get more muscle, add to your NAD stockpile, and just please make sure you're not insulin resistant. And if you are, work on it. So what you really want to optimize your metabolism is you want to optimize the function of your mitochondria, which if you've listened to any of my other talks or anything I've ever said, that is what I harp on all the time. Get your mitochondria right and everything works better. Your tendons, your cartilage, your bone, your muscle, your brain, so on and so forth. You reduce oxidative stress because you have a better engine that's not producing as much exhaust, right, when it's converting crude oil to gasoline. And then you also have time to restore and repair. So whenever the car breaks down, you go fix it. It works better. It runs properly. You have to, that's called mitophagy and autophagy. That's when the body self-eats damaged parts, recycles what it can, and eliminates what it can't. And then the restoration and repair of proteins overnight to include the enzymes necessary for your metabolism. So you want to optimize your mitochondrial health, which means you can't have too much glucose floating around. You need to give it time to repair itself overnight. And you need to give it all the micronutrients to work well, such as NAD, coenzyme Q that we talked about. So stable glucose levels are best. You don't want to spike and crash, spike and crash, spike and crash. So try to avoid eating things that have excess or added sugar. You want to control glucose levels because that lets you control insulin levels. You want to sleep well. A lot of fat is burned at night, and all of the repair and restoration goes on at night, and your brain detoxifies at night. You have to maintain a good mindset about food and health. You have to love healthy food. You have to know the healthy food is just doing so much for you. And you need to understand every time you eat a potato chip, which granted, some of us can't resist it. I love potato chips. Who doesn't love them? Just know what it's doing to you every time you eat it. You want to supplement for any given nutrient deficiency. I've already talked about NAD, coenzyme Q, but your mitochondria needs other things. It needs magnesium, it needs zinc, it needs vitamin C, so on and so forth. And then you want to be able to control your appetite. One of the best ways to control it, if you're not going to be taking things like berberine, et cetera, or any of these injectable drugs now that control appetite, or if you're not going to go get your stomach stapled to control your appetite, is to get on a good circadian rhythm and time restrict eat. And you will have natural appetite suppression. And then you want to eat real food because most people hit a set point with real food and they don't want to eat anymore. Remember, the fake food is engineered by food companies that have to show sales growth quarter after quarter, which means they have to make their food so addictive that you continue to eat it even when you don't really want to eat it. And they do that marvelously well. And then that leads me to my last point, to avoid the fake foods in as much as you can in this country. So glucose control, don't eat things like Skittles, don't eat candy. That, you might as well just pour sugar down your throat. So avoid anything with excessive or added sugar. There are some medications that can help you on your quest to get your metabolism under control. We already talked about some that suppress appetite. Metformin and berberine make your mitochondria work better, and they also help the insulin work better, which gets the glucose out of your bloodstream. Simple tricks like drinking a shot of apple cider vinegar before each meal will actually help you lower your blood glucose. And then, like I said before, when I was talking to the other person about exercise, walking, even 5 to 20 minutes, just take a little walk after your meal, especially if it's carb heavy, and your blood glucose will drop. And you'll avoid these spikes and crashes. You'll stay in that mid-range where you're supposed to be, that your body wants, where insulin works best and everything works more efficiently. When you have these spikes, it falls apart. When you crash, you get super hungry, you eat more, so on and so forth. So you got to avoid that. The body loves balance. Everything is Goldilocks, okay? You just want to be in that set point in the middle. All right, we have some questions.
Can you take berberine with Ozempic?
The question is, can you take berberine with Ozempic? You can. I would just watch it very closely and talk to whomever's prescribing your Ozempic. Ozempic works a variety of ways. The primary way we think that it's helping people is it basically makes you not want to eat. And that's a brain effect. Berberine upregulates AMPK, which is an energy sensor that the mitochondria use, and it does some other things at the cellular level. So in theory, yes, you could take them together. The risk, of course, is you don't want to drop and crash your blood sugar too much. So if you're not on a continuous glucose monitor, I would just run it by your physician first. But I know plenty of people that are doing both. Another question.
So there's a bunch of talk about getting rid of zombie cells. One class of drug is senolytics, remove them. Have you experience with it or more info regarding it? Is it worth doing?
Somebody's asking about senolytics that remove the senescent cells or zombie cells. So these are cells that have reached the end of their so-called lifespan. They've stopped dividing, but they're still biologically active, but usually they're biologically active in a bad way. So they're just pumping out an inflammasome of proteins and inducing inflammation. So there's a whole industry right now creating senolytics or drugs that remove these zombie cells. I think if you can find one and can get it prescribed or taken, a lot of them are just research level right now, to my understanding. But I think there's some good stuff there. I don't know enough about each type of senolytic to discuss it today. I could certainly work on a talk for that if y'all want in the future. But yeah, that is a whole, there's different tribes, if you will, in the longevity world, and that's one of them. And there's obviously something to it. We do need to get rid of the zombie cells. You want to keep your cells alive. You just don't want them pumping out inflammatory cytokines. You want them pumping out good things. And quercetin is a supplement that helps achieve that goal. Also, DNA repair by anything that upregulates sirtuins, which are the DNA repair enzymes. So anything like, resveratrol and NAD help to upregulate the sirtuins. So anything you can do that promotes DNA repair would be beneficial. Again, good sleep. Let's not forget the basics here. All right. And NMN, yeah, we talked about that. Carry on. So sleep. So 30% of you out there sleep less than 6 hours a night, which is terrible. Calorie burning decreases only by 15% compared to when you're awake, but you're burning fat when you're asleep. Sleep deprivation causes a 40% drop in glucose tolerance. That translates to more insulin resistant. So if you're less tolerant of glucose, you are more insulin resistant. Sleep deprivation, the converse statement here is a 40% increase in insulin resistance. Remember when I told you one of the best ways to get your metabolism optimized is to control your insulin? Well, it turns out one of the best ways to control your insulin is to get good sleep. And then poor sleep is linked to more inflammation and worse mitochondrial health. So you have to have a good sleep and a good sleep schedule if you want an optimized metabolism. Nothing else will help you like that will. Question. What supplements do I have to help with sleep? Okay, so we have some sleep gummies that have GABA, which is a natural inhibitory neuropeptide that kind of calms down glutamate, which is the excitatory neuropeptide. Tart cherry, which has natural levels of melatonin that helps you sleep. Melatonin, of course, which is the so-called sleep hormone. Chamomile. So we have a variety of sleep gummies that help with that. There's also a Delta 8 gummy that works really well. Per customer feedback on helping with sleep. And that is a derivative of the cannabis plant, of course. So that's, and then CBD, of course, helps with sleep. CBD is interesting because it's actually, they think not only linked to making your immune system function better and reducing inflammation, but it actually helps to drop your core body temperature, which is one of the prerequisites for a good night's sleep. So the optimal sleep temperature, if you didn't know, is about 65 degrees. And that may be surprising to a lot of people out there, but you sleep better if your inner body is colder. But again, take supplements, but they're not a replacement for getting a good schedule and controlling your melatonin production at night. So dimming the lights, don't expose yourself to blue light. Turn all your TVs to a warm setting if you watch TV at night. And there you can go into setting under picture and do that. That reduces the amount of blue light you're blasting into your face. All right, next. Another question.
When do you take berberine after each meal?
When do you take berberine is a question. Most people take it before each meal so that it's in your system when you give yourself that glucose load. Now, do you take it every meal? Everybody's different. Some people just take it with their breakfast, dinner. Some people take it 3 meals a day. A lot of people that time restrict eat don't end up eating 3 meals a day. So you only end up eating 1 to 2 meals a day naturally. And so you would take it about 30 minutes before. I think it's like 500 milligrams. Metformin is different. That's prescription, right? And that's been chemically processed from the French lilac plant. And it's made to, slowly elute over time. So you either take metformin twice a day, or there's an extended release you take once a day. Berberine's a natural substance that's a little bit closer to the actual plant, so you take it before meals. Okay, next. Your mindset. So just remember, food is awesome. Food is the only and best source of micronutrients to let your system work well. Good fats are very, very, very good for you. I tell people, eat as much cold pressed extra virgin olive oil as you can. That stuff is so good for you. It's so anti-inflammatory. It makes everything work better. Think that every time you eat something, think of what each bite is going to do for your body, for your health, for your brain, for your happiness. And then conversely, if you're eating crap, think about what that's doing to you. If you really love the taste of a donut and you love that greasy feel it leaves in your mouth when you're done eating it, knock yourself out. But just remember every bite, just tell yourself what it's doing to you. But don't stress yourself out if you can't resist the temptation once or twice. The main thing you can do is to cook. The best thing for food mindset, in other words, is cooking real foods at home with real ingredients with your friends and family, because that gives you the social connection that is also uniquely necessary by humans for optimization of everything. And then just maintain self-control when you are exposed to fake foods. You're not going to be able to maintain self-control if you're sleep deprived. In fact, the sleep deprived population craves these fake foods more than the non-sleep deprived population. So you are setting yourself up for failure and setting yourself up for a poor self-control situation if you are sleep deprived. So I don't know if you've noticed, but all of this kind of swirling around and linking together. Sleep, time-restricted eating, insulin, glucose control, so on and so forth. They all work together to make each other better or worse, depending on which direction you go. So appetite control, this is how Ozempic and all those drugs work. They basically control the appetite. So it's portion control with chemicals. Bariatric surgery is portion control with a mechanical zip up of the stomach. So you can harness your brain's power and the circadian rhythm power and get your own appetite control without needing all of that. And I don't know if you guys know this, and I don't want to be too controversial, but there's some literature out there that shows that the suicide rates are higher in people about 5-6 years after bariatric surgery. And they're starting to get isolated reports about suicide ideation or suicidal thoughts in the population taking GLP-1s. So there's always a side effect with a human chemical that's created to solve a human problem that we created, right? Just keep that in mind. I'm not saying they're not good drugs. I prescribe them to people a lot, but I just want you to keep it in mind. Anything you could do yourself for yourself with just some micronutrients and supplements, a good real food, that's always going to be better. Anytime you add protein and fiber to a meal that has carbs, it helps a lot. It slows down the digestion. It feeds the gut biome and the large intestine. It limits the amount of glucose that hits the bloodstream at once, so you don't get the spikes. So adding protein and fiber to any carb that you're eating is always going to be helpful. And hydration, we already talked about. Taking the apple cider vinegar before a carb-heavy meal, walking after, we already talked about. We've talked about the proper circadian rhythm. On the right are all of the obesity drugs that are currently, pretty sure these are all approved, yes, currently approved and allowed by the FDA for the indication of insulin resistance / obesity, okay? They all have good things, they all have bad things. And I have recommended or prescribed almost all of them to people because some people struggle. I've actually, what's not on this list, I've actually put people on medications used to help reduce sugar cravings. Very low dose naltrexone is one example. Certainly very off label. Oh, there's an issue with the whatever the
Their personal issue. They want to know.
we're having cyber issues in somebody's house. Yeah, this will be replayed. It's on Facebook or all our websites. It'll be available as long as the internet's available. All right, right. Okay, so the appetite center in the brain is at the arcuate nucleus of the hypothalamus. It is regulated by leptin and ghrelin, and turns out incretins, which are the gut hormones, which is how Ozempic and Mounjaro work, right? So leptin is an appetite suppressant, and it is made by fat cells primarily. Ghrelin is an appetite stimulant, and it's made in the stomach. So think of ghrelin like a stomach growling, like you're hungry and you want to eat more. Leptin does the opposite. So in theory, if you're overfed, you should have very high levels of leptin and you should not want to eat. Well, turns out doesn't work that simple in the human body. We become leptin resistant, just like we become insulin resistant. So most people that are insulin resistant or obese have very high levels of leptin, but they're still hungry. So go figure that one out. They're still working on it. They're still trying to create a leptin mimicking drug that works for obesity. They haven't been able to do it yet. Sleep deprivation. And back to sleep. So the less you sleep, the hungrier you're going to be. Sleep deprived prefer high carb products like we talked about, and the obese are usually leptin resistant for a variety of reasons. Same with sleep apnea, by the way, whether you're obese or not. Okay, now you can go on, sorry. The orexins, I don't know if anybody heard of that out there. This is another neuropeptide, orexin A and orexin B, and they regulate the energy homeostasis center in the hypothalamus of the brain. They're made in the hypothalamus. Narcolepsy, which is that daytime sleepiness, the people that fall asleep in the middle of the day for no apparent reason, that is associated with an orexin deficiency, and is also associated with decreased energy intake, but with an increased BMI and increased incidence of diabetes. So this is all linked. Again, I told you about 37 billion trillion chemical reactions per second in your body. Think about the complexity of the universe, of this planet, of your body. I mean, it is all linked together. That is why it's always better to treat things naturally, because we really don't know what we don't know, and the unintended side effects of drugs and surgeries are unknown. So why go there? They're working on orexin mimickers to try to harness the power of the orexins, but I don't think we're there yet. So can you increase your metabolism? Remember I told you, no, you can actually, but that means you have to change the entire way the mitochondria work. Well, turns out you can do that chemically. The mitochondria have evolved over billions of years, billions and billions and billions and billions, with this planet, with the plants, with the oxygen, the hydrogen, the carbon. Why anybody would want to mess with that, I don't know. ATP production and the electron transport chain are conserved among almost all species. So this system is there because it works, because it's very finely tuned and it's almost perfect if you think about it. We should not mess with this. But I'm going to give you an historical story of how it was messed with and then what the consequences were. So there was this drug that was found accidentally. It was called 2,4-dinitrophenol, or DNP. What happened was during World War II in France, in munitions factories, where they mixed DNP with picric acid to create explosives for the war, they noticed that a lot of the workers had these weird side effects. A lot of the workers lost a ton of weight. They were constantly tired. They sweated all the time. They had very high body heat. And they had some other problems. They had skin lesions. They got cataracts quicker. And a lot of people died from the overheating effect. What they figured out in this report in Stanford in 1933 during the Depression is that the metabolic rate was upregulated by 50%. So it became 50% faster with this chemical. So you can increase your metabolism, but the side effects are skin lesions, cataracts, death, and overheating because you have changed how the mitochondria work. I'm going to tell you what I mean. So there are some, you know, I don't want to say suspect, but just be careful when you buy anything fat burning, any sort of guaranteed to burn your fat supplement, because sometimes they'll stick in these substances that change how the mitochondria work, and you will have other problems, cardiac side effects, inducing psychosis, et cetera, et cetera. So this one drug, subitramine, was an FDA-approved drug. And I don't know if you know this, but at least 5% of FDA drugs are pulled off the market every year because of side effects they find out a few years later. Oops. So this one was banned for cardiac and psychotic side effects. Well, turns out some people are putting them in supplements now for fat loss. People have also put in drugs like MDMA and amphetamines because they make the mitochondria work a little bit differently and they make less ATP and more heat. And how does that work? The same way DNP does. To increase hyperthermia and sweating, you basically increase what's called the uncoupling protein function. So the uncoupling protein, the UCP, does exactly that. It uncouples the fuel source from ATP production. And remember I told you all of energy is conserved. Energy is neither created or destroyed. So the energy in the carbon bonds of the food is then converted to heat instead of ATP. So yeah, you've increased your metabolic rate with these chemicals, but you're basically cooking yourself from the inside. It decouples the fat carb breakdown from ATP production. Still broken down, energy's got to go somewhere. So it basically cooks your cells. Luft's syndrome is a known metabolic disease that does this, defective coupling between respiration and phosphorylation. So it decouples the electron transport chain. Severe hypermetabolism. And remember, anytime you go get your temperature checked, your temperature is supposed to be 37 or so degrees Celsius and 98.6 Fahrenheit or whatever, somewhere around that. It is there for a reason. The enzymes work better in this certain set strip of temperature. The protein folding and unfolding works better in that strip. The DNA formation and turning on and off of genes as you need it works better in that strip. If you increase the temperature, the proteins start to melt and denature. The cell membranes fall apart. Nothing works right. The converse is true. If you get too cold, you're going to die too because nothing works right. So we have a very set temperature, a very set pH level for certain reasons. So you really don't want to mess with that. Brown fat, you may have heard a lot about brown fat and cold plunging and things that increase your levels of brown fat. Brown fat is thermogenic because it has uncoupling protein 1 in it. So brown fat will actually make heat on purpose when you need to, like when you need to shiver. You ever notice when you take your kids to the beach and it's kind of cold and the water's freezing and they don't seem to notice? That's because kids naturally have more thermogenic brown fat. So they're able to take the food they eat and make heat where you're not. But when you become an adult, you don't want that. So I'm going to tell you about some people that have died from this. So you have to convert energy from food into heat and not usable or stored energy in the body if you want to increase your metabolism. So you really don't want to do that. Remember, I told you, you want to use what you have and just use it better because of these rules of the conservation of mass and energy. The uncoupling proteins are your direct regulators of heat formation, and they are found in the mitochondria. They will allow proton leak. Remember, I told you about the proton gradient and how important that was. And that is a highly exergonic process, meaning heat forming. So they can decouple mitochondrial respiration from ATP. Turns out some of these are put into bodybuilding supplements to help the guys look ripped, or girls, be it as it may. And then, of course, what happens? People died taking these things, trying to get ripped for some competition or other. So you don't really want a faster metabolism. Don't kid yourself. Remember, I told you humans create a set point no matter what. The hunter-gatherers of Africa burn the same number of calories as a sedentary officer worker in Illinois. You want to keep your temperature at a certain level. You want to keep your pH at a certain level. What you want to do is just eat really good, healthy foods, let your mitochondria work well, let your cells repair overnight while you're asleep, and you will find that naturally things will get better for you. You want to live comfortably in your set point, okay? This is a news report from, I don't know when, sometime in the 1930s or 40s, whenever this got in vogue, this DNP stuff. And they basically, it says, the most effective diet pill of the 20th century helped thousands of people lose weight by boiling them from the inside. And that's literally what it did. Remember phentermine, that gave people heart attacks and arrhythmias, had to be taken off the market. Anything that messes with your metabolism has horrible side effects, so I wouldn't go there. So just so you know now, there are some research scientists in the country actually looking at DNP, very, very low dose, as a way to induce stress responses in the cells and to control the uncoupling protein function to enhance longevity. This is way in the research domain, don't go near it, but that is being looked at. Another fun fact about this is that the Russians used DNP specifically for the decoupling process to keep their soldiers warm in the winter. Okay, they noticed that all of their soldiers also lost weight, but the Russians use this as a way to keep their soldiers warm because they can't provide enough blankets and boots, I guess. Who knows? And this we discovered because we had a government translator whose job was to translate Russian medical journals. He figured this out, and guess what he did? He took that bit of knowledge he got from the Russian medical journals and went and opened weight loss clinics around the country. Obviously, he became very rich. 7 kilograms of weight loss in a week was quite standard, but then they also noticed he was killing a bunch of people while he did this. He ended up going to jail for unrelated insurance fraud, surprise, surprise, and there he met this guy named Dan Duchaine. Dan Duchaine was in jail for selling anabolic steroids. Remember I told you about anabolism and steroids? He was in jail for selling those to bodybuilders. So what did he do the minute he got out of jail? Started selling DNP that he learned about in jail to bodybuilders, killing off bodybuilders. This is very unregulated. It's illegal. It's dangerous. The FDA does not allow this to be sold as a drug. But I just wanted you to know about it so you would know that the only way to speed up your metabolism is to boil yourself. And you don't want to do that. So why am I discussing bad drugs? Because you just want to know about your metabolic set point. Look at this. The red dots are hunter-gatherers. The gray dots are current Westerners. The blue dots are farmers. It's all basically the same. We end up burning the same number of calories no matter what. The problem is now we're eating a bunch of fake foods that kind of hijack and change the way the brain responds, and you just keep packing on excessive energy and storing it for no apparent reason, except that it's there. So you don't want the death and mayhem that comes with messing with your metabolic rate. You just want to live it within your means, just like you have to live within your means in terms of balancing your checkbook. Again, if you're not the government, you need to live within your means in terms of what you're physically able to do, what you're mentally able to do. You also have to live within your means of your metabolic rate. We already talked about berberine. It upregulates AMPK, which is an energy sensing molecule in the cell, and also upregulates things like sirtuins and stuff, and just makes things more efficient and better. Works similar to metformin. So that's a nice, gentle, natural way to help things out, but it's not going to make you 50% or able to eat 50% more. Certainly not. It's just going to make your system work better. And really, your goal is not weight loss just for weight loss. Your goal is optimal health, which means no insulin resistance, et cetera, et cetera. And then the byproduct of that is weight loss. Sorry, technical glitch. Okay, berberine turns out also helps the composition of your gut biome. I don't know if you remember the beginning of the talk, or maybe you weren't there. You are comprised of about 37 trillion cells. Your bacteria that you're carrying around in your intestines and elsewhere on your skin and such is 100 trillion cells. So berberine helps the composition of the gut biome, which ends up producing neurotransmitters and different proteins that you need to function optimally and for longevity. It increases AMPK, which is adenosine adenosine monophosphate phosphokinase. Basically, it can tell the ratio of ATP to AMP in your cell and get that balance where you're producing more energy in your mitochondria in an efficient way. It's actually been shown to reduce the testosterone levels in conditions like polycystic ovary disease. And it also helps to reduce insulin resistance, which is one of the best things you can do for yourself. And then, of course, because you don't have so much sugar floating around and insulin resistant, your fat cells aren't releasing all these free fatty acids in the bloodstream. Your liver cells aren't producing too much fat, and you can actually regulate your own cholesterol synthesis. So all this works together. The primary fundamental thing is good sleep. The second primary fundamental thing is insulin resistance control. Alpha lipoic acid, another good natural way to kind of help yourself out. Also called thioctic or thiostic acid, which is thio is a derivative of sulfur. So it's an organosulfur compound. It'll bind to some of the enzymes in the mitochondria that are involved in energy production and amino acid metabolism, okay? So most of, well, not most actually, just under 50% of an oral dose of a racemic mixture of the R and L enantiomer, which is like the mirror image chemical molecule, of ALA will be absorbed, and all of that's converted to the reduced form that's usable by your body. So it doesn't really matter which one you're taking, but they will increase the GLUT4 transporter response on the cell membrane to pull glucose out of the blood, which gives you what? Better glucose control, more stable glucose pattern. Remember, you want to be in that middle strip, and better insulin control. So this, of course, will help with weight loss over time. So I'm not saying that it's ever had a double-blind placebo-controlled trial for this, because of course it hasn't, but it has been shown to improve the mitochondrial function as it pertains to fat oxidation and glucose metabolism. They have studied it in terms of insulin sensitivity, and insulin sensitivity went up by about 25% on just 600 milligrams a day. And you don't want to take more because the effect doesn't get better after that. Alcar, acetyl L-carnitine. Alcar will become carnitine, which is an amino acid, when it's in the body and metabolized. Carnitine is very important for the beta oxidation of fatty acids. So again, to help your mitochondria use fat as its primary fuel source rather than glucose or fructose, okay? The main source of this is red meat. Now, a lot of us don't want to eat a lot of red meat anymore. So in that case, you would want to supplement with Alcar to get enough of the carnitine into your system to help with the beta oxidation of fat. This will also help to transport the long-chain fatty acids into the mitochondria to be utilized for fuel. And remember, you burn a ton of fat at night while you're asleep. So if you get good sleep and you've got all of these little building blocks, the alpha lipoic acid, the berberine, the Alcar, hopefully you'll burn just a little bit more fat at night, and over time you'll see some benefits. But again, you don't want any rapid, massive changes because those usually come with unintended side effects. Alcar is in the energy, which is the energy supplement also has a bunch of mushroom-derived compounds like lion's mane and chaga and reishi and things like that that help boost brain function. So we put it into that supplement. So real food is good. Honestly, if you have a good circadian rhythm and time restrict eat, you can eat as much real good food as you want. And you will find that you just don't want as much as you think you want. The fake food, which has been bioengineered, genetically modified, and transformed chemically in a factory to induce human cravings, that's a different story. I would stay away from fake food as much as humanly possible. And here's an example of fake food and why you want to avoid it. This is one example. I could have picked one of a gazillion. So the false combination of fat, sugar, and salt that are designed to hijack the hunger and satiety centers of your brain, you're always going to want more. You will become addicted. So you need to know that when you eat this food. Sometimes just knowing that will help you control that addiction. Real food will always induce a natural stopping point. Fake food does not. I put this example here to show you the difference between real food and engineered food and genetically modified foods. The chicken of yesteryear, 1957, versus the chickens of today. It's sort of disturbing and gross. And then look at the all organic, actually cage-free chicken that they sell at Whole Foods versus the bloated, hormone, genetically modified ones they sell cheaper, obviously, at the bigger chains. And then by day 48 of a chicken's lifespan, look at how big it should be if it's grown in the backyard of somebody's house versus where it is in a factory-sourced food production facility that you will then find in your normal grocery store. It's kind of scary. Just want you to be aware of what you're eating. So you are what you eat. It is true. So make sure you're eating like real things so that you can be real. So what do you do to optimize your metabolism? Understand if you are insulin resistant. Figure that out first. If you are, get with your doctor as soon as you can and work on controlling that. Establish a solid circadian rhythm, and if you can, incorporate time-restricted eating once you do that. You have to get 8 to 9 hours of very good sleep every night, non-negotiable. Hydrate as much as you can. Eat real food, including things like fats, olive oil, avocado oil. Those are great. Eat them. Consider supplements that support your metabolic health, but you're never going to biohack your metabolic health or you'll boil yourself to death. Exercise, because muscle is the best glucose vacuum. It literally sucks it out of the blood and puts it in a glycogen, which is a healthy stored fuel source. Control your blood glucose stability. Do not give yourself spikes and crashes. That in turn, along with the sleep, is going to give you good mindset control or a healthy mindset, the way you think about food. And then if, as a last resort, none of this really works, then consider medications. or do it all at once, or do the medications with your physician and then start doing this. Whatever. The goal obviously is to not be on a prescription medication, but to do it naturally. And you may have to take it stepwise. It may take 1 year to get a circadian rhythm. It may take 2 years. Who knows? It may take 2 years to start time-restricted eating and get used to it. Don't beat yourself up and stress out, because stress is just going to increase cortisol, which is a whole nother problem. I'm just giving you some tools, and I just want you to know that nobody has a faster metabolism than anybody else. We're all within the same range, okay? All you can do is make your mitochondria work better, where they don't make as many free radicals and reactive oxygen species that end up killing you down the road. That's it in a nutshell. That's it. I said all that.
She takes most of our supplements 24 a day. They're eating, she can take together. It's difficult to manage timing and when you should take them.
This lady has the same problem I have. She takes most of our supplements every day, so do I. And the timing is difficult for her to manage. I would say, short of the ones that you would want to coincide with meals like berberine, ALA should be taken on mostly an empty stomach, and then NMN and resveratrol and the turmeric, you do better in the morning with just a little bit of fat to help it absorb better. Other than that, I kind of I pile them on and just take handfuls in my morning clinic, really. And then I take tart cherry only at night because of the natural levels of melatonin. So those are really the only rules I give myself. Now, I could probably go through them one by one and come up with better rules, but in general, ALA in the morning on an empty stomach, NMN, resveratrol, turmeric need fat to help them absorb, tart cherry mostly at night, berberine with meals. And then obviously you don't want to take sleep supplements during the day.
Does dairy increase inflammation?
Question is, does dairy increase inflammation? So dairy is a whole controversial world. Turns out milk fat is actually good for cardiac health over time, assuming that it's milk fat from a grass-fed animal that's not genetically modified. Now, that's hard to find, but if you find that source of milk, I drink milk still, I eat cheese, I just try to make sure it's from grass-fed, no antibiotics added, non-genetically modified. Could it technically be considered inflammatory? Some people are very hardcore about this and say yes, but milk fat in all long-term studies is cardioprotective versus other types of saturated fats. And that just has to do with the way those certain fatty acids are metabolized.
So Vivian is obese, but she's been on a plant-based diet for a year. She wakes up really hot. How do you reduce body heat? She does take berberine daily.
So this is somebody who's obese, who's been on a plant-based diet and notes that they wake up very hot. That's interesting. So assuming that the room temperature is the same and still sort of cool, waking up sweating and hot is sometimes a sign of hypoglycemia, that your body's just spitting out cortisol to get the glucose reserves into the bloodstream so that your brain doesn't die. And then you wake up hot in those cases. So a lot of people with hypoglycemia will wake up sweating. Plant-based diet could mean all Skittles, could mean all lettuce. You know, a lot of things are plant-based that aren't good for you. So I'm not sure what you're eating right before dinner, but the best rule of thumb is to try not to eat anything about an hour or two before you fall asleep, so that you're already in a fasted state. And in theory, your glucose is at that set point. Yeah, plant-based diets are very prone to high sugar and fructose intake. So you really have to watch that, because that gives you those spikes. And then if you spike, you will crash, and that's when you get the cortisol spikes to make up for it. And then obviously make sure the room temperature is 65 degrees, 65 to 68. So that's it in a nutshell. I mean, I take all these supplements because I know the American diet's terrible, and I try to eat all real foods cooked at home, but it's really impossible in this country. 80 to 90% of what's sold at the grocery store is ultra processed. I know that, so I try to supplement my way around it while also trying to eat as many real foods as I can. Circadian rhythm is my number one weapon, time-restricted eating. And then I just try not to ever eat added sugar so I don't spike my sugar, so I don't have that sugar crash that we just talked about. So simple little tricks you can do to make yourself better, to make your life better and your mitochondria better, which will enhance your overall health and hopefully get you out of that 93% and into the 7% of us that are metabolically healthy. And you want to be in the 50% that are not insulin resistant. Another question.
What's your take on almond milk or 2% regular?
What is my take on almond milk or 2% regular? So the nut milks, they basically just soak a nut in water and extract the oils and flavoring that way. The problem with the nut milks and the oat milks and all these milk substitutes is they're usually filled with sugar to make up for the lack of taste and or other chemicals. Now, some of them are unsweetened, which is fine. I think if you're drinking an unsweetened almond milk, that's great. Knock yourself out. You're going to get some good protein with that, some good fats. But beware of the milk substitutes because often they are packed with sugar and other flavoring items, shall we say. 2%, same thing. Fat-free milk, 2% milk, they make up for the taste usually by adding some type of sugar. Remember, there's at least 56 different names for sugar. So just look at the ingredients, and if you don't know what a word means, Google it and make sure it's just not added sugar to make up for that fat. I put heavy cream in my coffee in the morning because that technically doesn't break my fast. I've worn a glucose monitor for a month and my glucose doesn't budge with pure fat. That's me. Not everybody's the same. But all of the dairy products that I consume are organic, no added antibiotics, no GMO. So they say. If there are any more questions? All right, well, hopefully that helps you out. I don't want you to beat yourself up and think that you got to do something crazy to hack your metabolism and get a faster metabolism. Just know that's not going to happen. That's not safe and not a real relevant human fact. All you can do is optimize your mitochondria for health, and that's what I want you to do. And in turn, you will have an optimized metabolism.